Hello and welcome to Redesigning Wellness, your go-to podcast for making the most of your corporate health strategies. Your host is Jen Arnold, corporate wellness consultant. With over a decade of experience in promoting worksite health, she'll help boost your wellness program to one your employees are sure to enjoy. And now, here's Jen.
Marilyn, welcome to the Redesigning Wellness podcast. I'm so glad to have you on today.
Thank you. My pleasure to be invited. Look forward to it.
Oh, yes. And we're going to be talking about a very interesting subject, office politics and how to navigate them. And, you know, they have such a bad rap. I personally have been one of those people who's like, oh, politics. So let's go ahead and just get that baseline understanding for my audience. How do you define office politics?
Well, first, let me say that any workplace that has more than 3 people will have office politics. So we all got to, accept that reality. It's the positive part of office politics, which is really the largest part, really involves behaving in a way that helps you build and enhance your credibility, reputation amongst your colleagues and your management. And that turns into influence, frankly. It's using your interpersonal skills to develop and maintain relationships to the important stakeholders. That could be your boss, your peer, if you manage people, your subordinate, to benefit not only yourself, the department you might be in, but the overall organization. But it gets a rap because there is negative politics, and that's very different. That really, just to throw it out, that's where one is focused solely and only on one's personal gain at the expense of others. And that's when you get toxic, dysfunctional kind of manipulation between people because there's a zero sum. I want to win, I want you to lose. But positive politics is really quite the opposite. Everyone wins.
Yeah, so I guess that's what I'm thinking of more than negative. That's when I groan and go, oh, they're such a nuisance, right? You come in and go, I don't feel like politicking today. I just want to get my work done, right?
Well, it's kind of like, let me give you the analogy. I was outside before and I live in a gated community and there's a lot of neighbors. And I was going to the mailbox and I said, oh God, I hope I don't bump into anybody because I'm really not in the mood. But there were people and I had to say, hi, good morning, with a smile on my face because it's lubrication. I call it the lubrication that oils, as the gears to things moving nicely, whether it's a neighborhood or it's an office environment. But it is fatiguing especially if you're not an extrovert, to expend that energy to, let people know that you're interested in them. But you don't have to do it in an extreme way. It could just be a smile or a greet or just, how are you today?
Yeah, so let's start off talking about maybe some common mistakes people make when they're navigating office politics. So when we're talking about office politics, now that you've defined it, are we going more to talk about the positive office politics, the things that kind of need to happen to, as you said in the beginning, build and enhance your credibility?
Well, can we start off with the negative mistakes that the mistakes that people make, either because of their character, and I hope none of your listeners have that.
Of course not.
Or naivete is engaging in, unconsciously or engaging in negative politics. That's the mistakes people make when they think I need to be political. For example, aggressively over-promoting yourself. And to the point where it's kind of about you and you're coming across as either entitled or angry. That's not going to create goodwill.
Yeah, I do, because this is an example that's actually going on in an organization where some friends work. There's a coworker who over promotes herself all the time, and her colleagues are just sick of it, right?
Yeah.
But the higher ups are always seeing it as great job, and so she's getting a lot of positive reinforcement and recognition out of it. But her peers are really, she's kind of isolating herself from her peers. So can you also speak to that when it's benefiting her from a, kind of growth perspective, but she's also alienating her peers?
Okay, I can. That's complicated
Of course.
because there are ways it is important to promote yourself, and that's the positive side. It is important to promote yourself. But my suggestion is you never want to turn anybody into an enemy. You never really want to make other people so either jealous, intimidated, or angry at you, peers or directs, that they will sabotage you at some point. So there is a risk from a mistake point of view in being so extreme in managing up in your promotion that you really neglect the friendliness or the collaboration with your peers and offset it a bit more. So, but I don't want to suggest that you shouldn't be promoting yourself. But there's a way to do it which is does not appear to your peers to be undermining them or being so self-centered and so narcissistic that you are doing it so regularly that it comes across obnoxiously, frankly.
And I
Um,
want to ask that. If you want to answer it later,
yeah,
feel
yeah, go
free.
ahead.
That's a great one. I had a quick question about the sabotage. I just want to put a fine point on what you said, because I think that is so true that even if people are getting around in the organization and being positively promoted and recognized, your colleagues and peers can sabotage you and you have no idea what's going on.
Exactly. Exactly. And one of the problems with getting promoted, perhaps, is that you become more, it becomes more political. It's not just task focused. And you're going to need the cooperation and the collaboration of others in an organization to get things done when your job is bigger.
Mhm.
And if you have people who you've already burnt or who have been turned off, whether it's conscious sabotage or they just want to withdraw from you because they don't like you, your career might be threatened. And the other piece that I want to throw in is management changes. You might be in a culture that actually thrives on aggressive promoting. Okay. So I know we're taking you off on a tangent
I love it
here.
though. Keep going.
Is that okay? But
Yes.
it depends upon the culture you're in, how politics can also be defined. I'm giving you definitions that come from my 40 years of experience, okay?
Mhm.
But there are some companies that are not actually that purist in their politics. In fact, the bad guys get ahead and the good guys don't always, all right? And the question there becomes, are you going to thrive in an organization where you really have to be self-centered, aggressively promoting yourself to the expense of others to get ahead? Because you may not win in an environment like that if that's not your temperament. So
That's a
I
very good
think,
point.
yeah, I have to put that point out there. So, but if you're in a culture where, for the most part, is fair and someone is aggressively promoting themselves and management is supporting it, then maybe you need to take a lesson from that person. And maybe you need, rather than to be resentful, you need to figure out, how are they doing that? How am I going to do it? Maybe I'll do it less obviously, but maybe I should be promoting myself also, not to compete, but to learn from.
hmm Yeah, and I think that was one of my most kind of like me going into office politics, being naive, going, well, for sure someone will recognize it. All my hard work will pay off, right? Because someone's going to recognize it. And sometimes they do, but most of the times you're just sitting there working hard and nobody even knows about it.
Yeah, and that's where I think I'm going to segue to something that I think captures the message here,
hmm
is that when you're young and you're young in an organization, a lot of it's about task performance and you think it's a meritocracy. So if you get an A in school, and you finish the task well, that your management will appreciate and see your capability and your potential. And sometimes that's the case. But that's the positive part of politics, is sometimes you probably do need to share. Even if you're at a junior level, you still may have to engage in self-promotion in a positive way. Because it may be that the results, are significant, but you may also want to show your bosses how much you thrived under that workload and the task and the projects, how much you've learned from it, and you hope that you've been of value and you'd like to be of more value.
Mm.
And what else can you be doing to show them your capabilities?
No, I think you I love the way you just said that, because you said it in such a politically savvy way that
Right.
it made it seem like I love doing this work, and how can I do more and bring more value to the organization? That is a brilliant way to put it.
Hmm. To respond to the other thing, though, a mistake, because I don't want to forget that thread we were on,
Mm-hmm.
is letting a negative emotion drive your behavior with others. And that's a mistake in the negative politics, or the politics, is if you're frustrated, like with the peer that's over promoting themselves, or with your boss who's not giving you the right priorities or resources to do your job. There is a way to problem solve that and communicate that without letting your affect, your emotion of being angry or being frustrated lead you in the communications, so that you start off antagonizing people and putting them on the defensive when you're in that state. So the mistakes you make in engaging and trying to influence or involved in politics is when you lead with negative emotion. That's never very helpful.
No, not at all. And, one thing you said earlier too is that management could change. And one thing you said, I don't know if people or my audience can, has their eye on, is that you don't think of your position necessarily and where you are today, but if you want to advance, you're going to need people to help you get there.
Yes.
And management could change, and you need some allies in the organization. So just again, when I highlight that piece that you said, I'm not thinking necessarily of where you are now, but do you want to move within the organization?
Yeah, and you're bringing up a really, I think, important point, is that one of the big benefits to good office politics is the developing of relationships. And they can be with your level, or they can be with a higher level or a lower level. And sometimes from the higher level is when, in developing these relationships, you develop sponsors and mentors, and there's a difference. We could have another podcast to talk about that. But for the moment, and that's how you can navigate your career, because other people, especially in a larger organization, people get ahead because people sponsor them, talk about them to human resources as a high potential. So part of good politics is developing good relationships with people who you like, people you need to work with, but also people of influence themselves, who can see your potential.
Right. You don't always know those conversations are going on, but I know I've had some advocates in my organization prior that you're like, oh, wow, they're really going to bat for me. You may not know it, but the
Exactly.
talks happen behind closed doors and in the hallways, and your name may or may not get brought up.
Exactly.
Okay. So common mistakes, you put leading with negative emotions. That's one. Over promoting, but still promoting yourself. I want to get back to that kind of
aggressively over promoting yourself.
Aggressively over promoting yourself,
where it creates ripples with others, like you pointed out. The other is really not adapting when there's a shift in the culture, the style, or the management of an organization. And the stakeholders might change, or the tone of the culture might change. And regardless of where you are in the organization, even if you've gotten used to the previous management or the previous style, even if you don't like the new management of the new style, if you want to at least hold on until you find something else, you have to engage in the appearance of adapting and changing your style to suit the new organization. That's politics. So let's say everybody goes from wearing jeans, where you're allowed, to the dress up is a little more formal, and you don't really have that kind of clothes because you've gotten used to jeans, and because you have a private equity company that's taken over your startup. Okay. And you're used to a lot of flexibility and all of that. And that's great. And it's been wonderful. But you don't have another job to go to. Well, get some clothes that fit the new culture. Don't expect to leave at 1:00 on Fridays in the summer. It might be that the company's really driving people to be a little more work focused, and the perks are a little less. I'm not saying you have to stay there the rest of your life. I'm just saying that just because you don't like it doesn't mean you shouldn't appear as if you're adapting to it.
Right. Yeah, and I have seen it whenever, a new regime comes in and you do see everyone like doing their little dog and pony show because they have to go get in front of them to say, here's who I am and here's kind of the value I bring to the organization. But sometimes it can, kind of result in an eye roll. You're like, oh, everyone's doing
Yeah,
their song and dance, but it's very necessary.
absolutely.
So you named three kind of common mistakes people make. Is there anything else?
Off the top, I mean, there probably are, but, I would say gossip is a big piece. And that sometimes people develop relationships with other people through the art of putting other people down or gossiping.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say I understand it feels good sometimes to at the water cooler. That's a symbolic expression here, but to schmooze about how we feel about other people in the organization, especially those that we find obnoxious. Be careful, though. The political mistake is the person that you're sharing with might decide to share what you said to somebody else, and that somebody else could be a good friend of the person you just dumped.
Mm-hmm.
And they could find out, and you've created an enemy who could, we talked about sabotage before, who could sabotage you. So be careful with your communications when you are referring to other people and your feelings about them. Now, if you trust somebody completely, then, fine. I'm not going to say it's a human thing to gossip. But, got to be sure of who you're talking to when you go the negative route.
Yes, that has happened to me in my early career. It's not a good choice.
And it happened to me. One of the biggest mistakes I ever made in my corporate career before I went off independently was to say something about my boss to someone who wanted my job.
And you did not know it, huh?
No, I didn't. It was so naive, so foolish, and it really had impact on me. Yeah, I mean, and I'm a smart person, but it was a loose moment. I was frustrated, which is why we talk about being careful when you're at work, leading with frustration and negative emotion, because that sometimes is what gets us into negative gossip.
Yeah, you don't have to say the same was me. I was very frustrated with a particular situation, and the person was kind of the warm, welcoming, oh, tell me more.
Yeah.
She was above me and she wanted to get ahead in the organization. So she was totally going to, use it as some leverage just to get closer to this person who is even higher than her. And you're
Exactly.
like,
Oh, yeah, the games people play. Oh, my heavens.
And that's where it gets that exhausting, it gets exhausting. But some of these are mistakes that I think we've all made, we can learn from. I want to get into some tangibles in just a minute, but you talked about benefits, and I think focusing on some of the benefits, the influence and the relationships that you mentioned earlier. Tell me. I know you mentioned sponsors versus mentors, and so how can you, especially if you maybe at a lower level in the organization or kind of out siloed in your area, how do you get someone to sponsor you or mentor you to help that influence when you don't feel like you have it?
Okay.
Big question.
It's a big question.
We can do a follow-up.
Okay, we can do a follow-up. But let me separate the terms.
Yes.
Mentor is someone who you privately talk to about learning the office politics, learning about how to add more value, but it's private. It might even be confidential. They could be an internal coach, but they're not necessarily the people who are going to sponsor you. So that there's a difference, because you might show more vulnerability with a mentor when you're having difficulty and you're really going to them. So finding them. So let me start with the mentor side. There either are organizations that actually have organized mentorship programs. And I would check with HR. You're assuming you have a human resource department, check. And if you're a younger employee, new to an organization, new to this company, whatever, and you really would like to find people that you could learn from, I think you go to HR and you just ask the question. There may be, I know that there are some companies, very progressive companies, that actually assign people mentors. And hopefully you guys are compatible, but I would also use the mentor the same way I would use every other relationship, which is don't get involved in negative emotion, don't get involved in negative gossip. Go to them with a problem or a challenge or a request to understand how to promote oneself a little more and get their feedback, especially if the mentor has been part of the organization for a while and understands the nuances and the ways of navigating. But a mentor is not the same as a sponsor. A sponsor might be your boss, particularly, and your mentor is not your boss, by the way. There might be some bosses that will act like mentors, but they also do your job, your appraisal and your reviews. And the mentor should be someone who's a little more unconditional and is not going to rate you, but is really there to support you. You could also find a mentor outside the organization through, other groups that you might be part of or friends that you might have who are just a little more sophisticated than you are about the nature of the work environment. Now, I don't want to pitch my book, but the Office Survival Guide has a lot of points in there, written by me, has a lot of points in there on some of these issues. But the sponsor is someone, and it could be HR, who's spotting talent. Could be the people who run talent or the people who run HR. It could be the people in your stakeholder group that you might work with on a project that might be on your level in another department, or they could be other senior people that you work with that you impress. Right? And the idea there is to impress as many people as possible with your talent, with your personality, with your desire to add value and grow. Because that will get through and they will think about you for other opportunities that come along.
Yeah, that is the truth. And Marilyn, I'll make sure to link up your book in the show notes.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. Thank you.
Valuable resource.
Yeah.
So I think those are, thank you for defining those each for me. And I think it was key to say, you may not want to be as vulnerable to your boss as you are to your mentor.
Exactly.
Distinguish those two. But what if your boss is not really proficient in office politics? I used to have one who really enjoyed this person because they were a straight shooter and they were tell it like it is. That's my personality too, but not the most astute at office politics. So what do you do in that case if you want to make sure that your department, your area, you or your team is getting kind of seen, but your boss may not be doing.
All right. So there are two things that come to mind. One is it's what we just talked about. And that is if you've established relationships through the good politics we're recommending, if you've established relationships with a number of people within the organization and HR, your boss's political acumen may impact you less than it would if you had all your eggs in the basket of your boss navigating your career. So it's a little bit of an insurance policy, frankly, if your boss is either clueless or reluctant, to sponsor, to move things forward for you. That's, or your department. That's one thing. The other thing is sometimes you can coach your boss without the boss feeling he's being coached or she's being coached. And it's sensitive. You have to be careful what your narrative is and how you approach it. But I've coached people to coach their boss without their boss knowing they're being coached. And assuming it's not an evil boss who has terrible office politics or is an inept boss who has terrible office politics, maybe just someone who's clueless and is not resistant to learning how to be better at it. One can say, hey, look, I think we get more in the way of this, and this. I don't know what the particular situation might be, but we might be able to get more resources if we do this. Or maybe if we made some changes here, I need your support. And with your support, I think we can create some more success here. And if you don't mind, I have some ideas on how we can do that. I'd love to share them with you. That might be, rather than getting frustrated at someone who's inept, maybe be more gentle with them and find a way to motivate them to listen to you and give them some ideas.
Right. And helping them get what they want anyway, right?
Yeah,
Like,
look,
I figure
sometimes,
that.
yeah, and sometimes we have to do that. I think the problem with organizations, and this is the basic psychology of it all, is that when we have a boss, we think we're the child and they're the grown up. And the grown up should know what they're doing.
Mhm.
All right. And we get frustrated when they don't know what they're doing, and we may have a negative impact as a result of their not being competent enough in one thing or another. And I say then, okay, so rather than play the victim here, what can you do to affect change of some sort? How can you use your communication skills, your intelligence to potentially help that person be better at their job so that you get what you need? Now, I'm being idealistic. There may be bosses that are so clueless and so inept that you actually can't be that successful
Mhm.
in your job because they're blocking success for your organization because they are really, really, really incompetent or irrational or crazy or whatever it might be. That's when you got to start thinking about not acting out when you're frustrated or angry, but really start thinking about seeing if you could change jobs, either within or leave and go somewhere
Mhm.
else. Not
Yeah.
leave, but go somewhere else.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's part of what you said way earlier, which is one thing that I didn't do very well was accept the situation. So it doesn't mean you agree with it, but going, here's how my organization navigates.
Yeah, and it takes, the problem is getting older is great in political wisdom because of the level of experience and the lack of taking things so personally and seeing it through the eyes of a bigger picture and figuring out the navigation. But when you're young, you don't have that experience. You don't have that wisdom, which is why it's good to have mentors and people and books to read and podcasts like this to build up the wisdom quicker.
Yeah, I could have really used your book. I don't know if I would listen to all the advice that I know on there.
I could have used my book.
Well, I'm just so bad at it. And so let's get to some tangibles. 'Cause I have one question I'm going to throw at you a little bit later,
Yeah.
kind of out of left field. But how do we deal with this? What is your advice for this kind of negative emotion? Because I think that personally is what fueled me a lot. You're just like, can't people see the problems around here? I can just fix them all, and you just get frustrated because it feels inefficient sometimes, and you're like, you could be quicker at it. And so, how do you really tamp down that negative emotion so you're not showing up that way, because that's not helpful for anyone.
Yeah, that's a lesson in self-management. Well, it's a lesson in self-awareness and self-management. We first have to know what we're feeling and why we're feeling it and what triggered it.
Mm-hmm.
That takes maturity too, but it's also helpful in personal relationships. When your boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife or kid says something that really, I don't want to use the wrong word here, but really frustrates you,
Mm-hmm.
and then we react, and then they react to our react, and we react, and then we're at a standstill. We want to end the relationship because we're so frustrated with each other. That's the danger of the contagion. You got to be aware of you that you're feeling angry or you're feeling frustrated. And why are you feeling angry and frustrated? Maybe you're overreacting.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're reacting healthily. But whatever you do, if you react on the basis of the emotion without processing it and thinking through the cost and the benefit of how do I make change here so I'm less frustrated? Or maybe I'm being too perfectionistic. Maybe the type A perfect person, which I used to be, wants everything to be like I am, perfect. So I want everybody to be perfect. And when they're not perfect, I was hard on my staff when they weren't. And that led to, demoralization and bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point I said, I cannot rely on my level of frustration as my clue to intervention. I just have to take a deep breath and say, sometimes, perfectionism is the enemy of the good. Sometimes good is good enough, and I don't have to react. But if you feel like you really do have to react, do it when you're calmer down. Walk around the block, go to the ladies' room, men's room, get something to eat, talk on the phone to a friend. Let it blow down until it's manageable. When it's manageable, and your thought is in control of the affect as opposed to the affect in control of the thought, then you can behave, but don't behave when the emotion is controlling it.
Yes, that power of the pause, right? Just
Yeah.
giving yourself a break can do wonders. And then, something that helps me is just like when I hear myself, like I'm a talker out louder, right? So if I go talk to somebody and I hear myself almost whining or playing victim more than once or twice, I'm like, oh God, be quiet already. Like I can't stand it.
And don't send that email. If you're
Yeah.
smack in the middle of a frustration with a peer or somebody, and you want to write them like, what in heaven's name is this? How stupid is this? Put it in your draft. If you feel like you have to express yourself, put it in draft. Look at it a half an hour later. Because you might really inflame your relationships with people. And again, we don't want to take the risk of creating enemies.
Yeah, that actually happened to me. I remember being in a meeting and a coworker, as a peer who I had a great relationship with, I thought completely threw me under the bus in a meeting. And I did draft an email, never sent it, but that made me feel much better because sometimes you're like, it's not going to help anything for me to tell her how I felt in this situation. She's just
However, had I been coaching you, I might have said, take her to lunch, look her in the eye and say, look, I value you. I'd like you to value me. What went down in that meeting last week, assuming it happened more than once, because maybe it was a boo-boo on her part one time. I would appreciate as colleagues, supportive colleagues, that if you ever have an issue with me, you talk to me about it privately, but you don't do it publicly. I mean, I think there's room for that kind of communication. If you think, though, I'm going down another road now, but if you think that she's evil and can't be trusted, then you're going to ignore her and get away from her as far as you can. Yeah. And you won't have that conversation. But anyway, so you asked about tactics, tangible tips rather.
One thing I want to get into before, because I think this is what my audience may be needing the most, is how do you promote yourself without over promoting yourself? Because I do think that in the wellness professionals I've worked with, they tend to do really good work, very hard work, but they do not promote themselves as well. And I think they can be invisible in an organization.
Yeah. And again, that some of it is the professional class and some of it is youth and some of it is starting in an entry level job where it's all about task. Mm-hmm. And that does happen. I think most people at some point realize that they do have to speak up unless they're in an organization that's structured to be a meritocracy. And truly, where the promotions and the salary increases are absolutely tied to something that can be measured quantitatively. It's why salesmen and people who, have jobs that can be measured by the revenue they bring have a much easier job of being promoted and getting salary increases, and they don't have to engage in as much self-promotion and politics. Mm-hmm. So seriously, it's a very important point. But when you're in a staff role, a non-revenue production role, professional role, task-oriented role, you want to promote. What does promote mean? It lets people know, your boss particularly, how much you want to add value, feedback on how you're doing, and that you're open to new challenges because you want to grow, you want to learn, and you're ambitious in a good way to help the organization. So that's the message when you're promoting. It's not necessarily to go in and say, I just saved this person's life. And
where's my raise?
Where's my raise, right? I mean, it's a little manipulative. I mean, on the other hand, let's say you really are in a life-death situation, or you are in a situation where a lot of your value is behind the scenes and it's never noticed, then I think it might be important to say, hey, look, I realize that I'm in a rather invisible position, and some of the efforts that I bring to my job aren't always visible. So what I'd like to do, and this could be an email, it could be a conversation, and one-to-one, could be a phone call. I'd like to share with you on a monthly basis some of the achievements that I have been able to bring forth that have had real positive impact. Not to show off, but to just educate you a little bit or inform you on, what I'm doing. And I did that in my job, God knows how many years ago, when I was working in a corporation running their mental health program. I basically suggested to my boss that he was not a professional. He was an administrator. I was the psychologist. So I said, I think it might be helpful if I send you a monthly report letting you know the volume of people we've served, the positive impact we had, the problems we've been able to avoid because of the interventions of my department. And I think it's important you know this. So the promotion can come through educating about what you're doing and how you've done it. And some of it will come because you put yourself out there as somebody who aspires to more and more, more work, more learning, more programs. Maybe there are leadership development programs or training programs that you want to raise your hand for. Mm-hmm. So those things are all part of promoting yourself.
And one thing that I heard, and this kind of leads me to my next question, but correct me if I'm wrong, that it's more about the value to the organization. It's not about the person.
I think it's both, okay. But I think your approach when we think about the politics, I think of course it's about you. I mean, look, at the end of the day, this whole conversation's about you. We're talking about you're getting a bigger job, making more money, and having more impact. We're not talking about, being a good citizen of an organization primarily, but it's in servicing an organization, your boss, and appearing that much of your motivation is geared towards using your talents to add value. But you want to be recognized for your talents, but your motivation is to add value.
Okay. So let me ask this question. This is a little left field, but I know you coach a lot of executives and CEOs, so I'd love to get your perspective.
Right.
So typically a wellness professional goes in and doesn't have a high sight line and maybe wants to get the CEO's attention or senior leadership involved. And how do they go about getting and influence the CEO, knowing that the CEO has so many other things that they're thinking of and have on their to-do list? And I think sometimes wellness professionals can come up and go, it's about me, it's about the wellness program, instead of maybe serving the whole company, if that makes any sense. So do you have any tips on how they can engage a senior leader who may not have wellness on their mind? It may be just not even a flash in their brain when they think about the organization.
Okay, that's complicated because all I'm thinking right now is the downside of appearing to go, let me go backtrack.
Mm-hmm.
If one works directly for the CEO, that's easy.
Yep, never happens.
Okay. If one works further down the food chain, mm-hmm. you almost have to engage your higher ups to have access. The danger is, the real negative political danger is in the ambition for yourself or for the organization, bypassing perhaps your own chain and winding up in the CEO's office or taking advantage of a meeting you're having with the CEO on something else and using it without having it cleared through your chain of command is negative politics, perhaps. Mm-hmm. So it's dicey. You're bringing up something very dicey, and it really is at the core of good politics. And it's frustrating. I understand that. However, if you have a supportive chain of command, I don't see why one can't be asked to be in either meetings with the CEO, sharing with them what your point of view is and how helpful you think it would be, or asking them to do what you'd like to do and helping them figure out how to do that. Mm-hmm. But I think to go directly to a CEO, to engage him or her, and get their attention without being respectful to your bosses is taking a risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll have to definitely come back another time and revisit that, because I think I've been lucky at my last job. I got to sit down with the CEO, present my plan. Like, he was very involved. But I've also had situations to where my boss was a blocker, and anything that went higher up, nope, can't go through. Everything goes
Well,
through.
one of the things, I'm just going to throw it out, but this is advanced politics.
Politics 2.0.
If you've developed a mentor or sponsor in an organization and your boss is a block, but you do actually think the CEO should have this information, either to protect the organization or to add more value, you could ask the sponsor or the mentor or someone who's not in your whatever, who may have access to the CEO. If the CEO contacts you and wants to talk to you and shows interest, oh yeah, you share it with your boss that you're doing it, but you can't say no to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've actually at one point got an email from the CEO asking me a question about something. I don't even think I copied my boss because it was irrelevant. But yeah, sometimes they do reach out. I mean, especially if they come across a new idea, or they go to a conference, God forbid, and have someone come up to them. So they really could be getting those emails directly.
Mm-hmm.
So you've given so much good advice, but is there one tip that you would say that someone needs to go out and try to navigate office politics and to really swing it in their favor?
Know what you want to get out of it. Know what your goal is.
What kind of goal? Like, what do you mean?
Like, office politics is a very broad term.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to be making more money? Do you want a bigger job? Do you want to influence your boss to go left or right? Do you want to develop your staff better? What are the politics? Who are the stakeholders you're trying to influence? What do you want to get out of it? Be aware of what your basic goal is. Then you can orchestrate a plan. But office politics really comes down to using relationships for not only enhancement of your career, but the enhancement of an organization, right? But using it in a positive way. But you got to figure out, why do you want to influence? What do you want to get out of it before you engage in it?
Mm-hmm. Right.
The general politics would just have to be like walking in your neighborhood and saying hello, is be friendly. Be friendly to people, show courtesy, do people favors, help and support your colleagues, show recognition when people have helped you in a form of an email. Thank you, send thank you emails, thank you texts, pat people on the back, show interest and empathy when you learn about people having family problems or a death in the family. You want to establish a level of goodwill around you with all the important stakeholders. That's good office politics on a day-to-day basis, and it builds goodwill. Having goodwill, then you can leverage when you are specifically saying to yourself, how do I want to use these relationships to get something out of it?
Which sounds interesting. That sounds almost a little sneaky.
No, it doesn't. That's how things happen. It's reality. It depending upon one's value system. I mean, there's nothing, I think when we think sneaky, manipulative, unethical, all of that, we should say, are we trying to hurt someone? Are we trying to put someone else down? Are we trying to put them under the bus? Are we trying to take something away from someone for ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
And if that is what, at the end of the day, your motivation is about, that's evil. That's bad politics. That's bad manipulation. But if human nature, you're making friends and allies and people like you, and you want to use the likability and the credibility that you've developed to either get a higher salary, another job, more resources, a new staff member to hire, what is wrong with that?
You said it well. There's nothing wrong with being likable. Gaining friends.
No, but leverage the likability to get what you need or your organization needs so that you can be and your organization could be successful. It's very clean.
Right. And you have to have that likability plus some skills. I've seen people that are likable.
Yeah. Can we just assume that I'm assuming that your listeners have have the talent and the skill?
They do. It brought to mind this person who is in my organization who nice guy. Everyone's just like, God, he's such a nice guy, but just totally, for lack of a better word, sucked at his job.
No, but my finishing point, I just want to say, Jen, is that it can't just be your task performance. Okay, task performance and having the critical skills and the talents are critically important. Office politics is leveraging that and your likability by developing relationships to either get more for your department, for yourself, influence others within the organization to take a path that they're not been taking. That's where I'm talking about office politics. That's the to get more, to influence. Yeah.
Thank you for that fine point.
You're welcome for that fine point.
Now, Marilyn, where can people learn more about you? I stumbled upon you from articles and, got engrossed in your website, which of course I'll link up in the show notes along with the book.
But that might be the starting point, or the book, The Office Survival Guide, and my website, which is the book is on my website. And they could, if anyone's interested, I believe on my website, there's a contact thing where you can contact me directly through my email. That would be great.
Right. Well, Marilyn, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
If you want to make a greater impact on your organization's well-being and influence decision makers to step into the next generation of wellness, join me and my colleague, Rebecca Johnson, for our new training, Next Generation Wellness from Theory to Practice, starting in September. To get on the priority notification list, go to redesigningwellness.com/impact and influence. We hope to see you there.